The Green Sheet is a financial publication of the MWRA Advisory Board. The September installment explains the MWRA's role as a wholesale provider of water and/or sewer services to 60 communities. Those communities then act as retail providers to their residents and businesses, adding in their own operating and capital costs to a ratepayer's bill. Let's dive right in on the water side. The MWRA's budget drives the rate revenue requirement for each fiscal year. The MWRA then recovers those costs through assessments to the communities. This is the FY15 budget for all things water, which after offsets is $210.2 million for the rate revenue requirement in red. The biggest driver is capital expenses, most easily thought of as debt service on capital projects. The authority employs what is called a zero-sum approach. It captures the cost of all water delivered by assessing each community based on their share of the total system. This is calculated in MGD, or millions of gallons per day. Assessments are calculated by multiplying a community's share of the total water use to the total fiscal year rate revenue requirement. The first thing to understand is that a fiscal year's wholesale water assessment is based on the last calendar year of actual water use, so calendar year 2013 water use is the basis for the fiscal year 15 assessment. Newton used 8.822 MGD out of the system total in red. This is a system share of just under 5% of the total rate revenue requirement of $210.2 million, resulting in a $10.4 million assessment for Newton. And now with this understanding of how the share is calculated, let's answer the most common question asked. Why has a water bill gone up over the past decade when water usage has gone down? We'll start at the top of the alphabet and use the town of Arlington as an example, comparing fiscal year 04 and fiscal year 15. In fiscal year 04, Arlington's water use compared to the system total water use was a 2.09% share of a $123 million pie. This was a $2.6 million assessment for Arlington. In FY15, the town's use compared with the system's use was a 2.17% share of a $210 million pie, resulting in a $4.6 million assessment for the town. So while Arlington's water use decreased by 11% over this time, the system's water use decreased by 14%, meaning that Arlington's share of the pie actually increased, which was combined with an increased total rate revenue requirement. We'll discuss the efforts being made to mitigate the rising wholesale assessments in the conclusion of the video. Moving now to the wholesale sewer rate methodology, this rate is also based on a zero-sum approach, but there are several more factors that go into calculating a community's share of the system. As with water, the wastewater budget is set, and this defines what the rate revenue requirement is for the fiscal year. The capital expenses are an even greater factor on the wastewater side and drive the $440 million rate revenue requirement. But as stated, there are intricacies to the sewer rate methodology, and it's important to understand the history of how the authority arrived at its current methodology. We'll start with the Acts of 1993, when the Commonwealth directed the MWRA Advisory Board to determine a wholesale rate methodology which fairly and equitably assessed the MWRA's sewer communities. The Advisory Board appointed a 13-member community-based committee which worked with the Advisory Board staff, MWRA staff, and independent consultants, and after nearly 100 open meetings, the new methodology was implemented in fiscal year 1996. The process resulted in two major changes. First, it added flow characteristics into the equation with population, and after a few fiscal years budget cycles, 3-year averaging of flow was adopted to smooth out the wild fluctuations in assessments that were caused by wet and dry seasons. This was done because the fluctuations were making it difficult for communities to budget sewer costs from year to year. Let's first look at how it works and then why the changes were necessary. The allocation basis is split between operating and maintenance expenses and capital expenses. Operating and maintenance expenses are allocated entirely based on a community's share of average daily flow characteristics. In other words, communities pay for the day-to-day workings of the system based on their average day-to-day use of the system. On the other hand, 75% of capital expenses are allocated based on share of system-wide population. This is split evenly between the census population and the population that communities consider to be MWRA system users. The other 25% of capital expenses is allocated using a community share of maximum monthly flow characteristics. So why is population and maximum flow attributed to capital expenses? The answer is tied to capital project planning. Obviously, pipes have to be sized to handle maximum, not average flow, so capital project spending is driven partly by sizing the materials to match these parameters. Also, capital projects by design aim for a long useful life, so future population projections have to be considered. It's not cost effective to have to dig up a pipe and put in a bigger one later as a community goes through periods of development. But it isn't just a simple population plus flow calculation, so let's look at a breakout of the many components. This pie chart shows a more complete picture, namely that flow characteristics and population are weighted pretty evenly. To the right is population at almost 50% of the total FY15 wholesale sewer assessment. To the left, these are the characteristics of flow. Maximum and average flow combine for 37% of the total. Total suspended solids is just above 8%, and biochemical oxygen demand, or BOD, is 6.6%. BOD is a product of food waste in the system, and communities use varying methods for billing their larger food waste contributors. But to avoid a trip down the scientific rabbit hole, let's move from how sewerage works to how it's calculated. And since we started at the beginning of the alphabet with Arlington, we'll use the city of Woburn as an example here. As we did with water, let's look at the share in relation to the rate revenue requirement. First, we'll take the calculated share of the average daily flow based on the 3-year average. The total system flow is 310.75 MGD. Woburn has a 2.34% share of that flow. The city also has a calculated 1.74% share of population. Both of these factor into their final share of the total system, and 2.17% of $440 million is $9.5 million. Overall, this wholesale sewer rate methodology attempts to fairly assess communities based on the factors just discussed, while also allowing communities to effectively budget their sewer costs from year to year without wild fluctuations which get passed on to the ratepayers. So what conclusions can we draw for those concerned about rising wholesale rates for water and sewer? Well, wholesale sewer rates are being driven mainly by capital financing costs, the debt service paid on billions of dollars worth of federally mandated capital projects. As these bonds are paid down, the capital financing number is scheduled to decline, measurably improving the outlook for member communities and their ratepayers. For wholesale water rates, paying down debt is also a factor, but perhaps the most significant change will come from possible system expansion. Growing the size of the pie can make a current community's share of that pie smaller, reducing their assessment. For more information on system expansion, see the May 2014 Green Sheet, which provides a brief history of the system and an explanation of another key component of system expansion, the entrance fee methodology. The Green Sheet is intended to be as brief as possible, but if you'd like more comprehensive information on this or any other topic, please feel free to contact us directly. Thank you.